Speaker. Welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. The Board of Internal Economy requires that committees adhere to the following health protocols. Maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from others. Wear a non-medical mask unless seated, and preferably wear a mask at all times, including when seated. Maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizers provided in the committee room, and regularly wash your hands well with soap. As the chair, I will enforce these measures, and I thank you all for your cooperation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you may choose to hear floor audio or in English or French. With the latest Zoom version, you do not need to select a corresponding language channel before speaking. The raise hand feature is on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. A reminder to all the members and the witnesses that all comments should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your microphone should be muted. The committee clerk and I will maintain a speaking list for all members. Before we go into today's witnesses, I just want to inform the member that the clerk has distributed version 1 of the draft report for labor market impact assessment. To allow members time to read the report before we commence this consideration, I have instructed the clerk to schedule witnesses to appear this coming Wednesday, June 9th, and schedule Monday, June 14th as the first day for the consideration of the LMIA draft report. So next Monday, we will be going through that, and Wednesday, we will have the witnesses on this study. Today, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, May 26, the committee is resuming a study of the economic imperative and long-term importance for small rural municipalities outside of major cities to retain new immigrants. I would like to welcome the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Thanks to all the witnesses for giving us this time. Today, in the first panel, we will be hearing from rural municipalities of Alberta, being represented by Paul McLaughlin, President, and the Executive Director, Gerald Rhodes. Also, we will be hearing from Andrew Griffith, former public servant, author, and a commentator. He will be appearing before the committee as an individual. And we will be hearing from Justica for migrant workers, being represented by Chris Ramsaro. So thank you once again. All the witnesses will be provided 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will go into a round of questioning. For rural municipalities of Alberta, we have 2 witnesses, but both of you will share the time, and the total time allocated for your opening remarks will be 5 minutes. So with that, I would start with the rural municipalities of Alberta. Mr. McLaughlin, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. Great to come from rural Alberta to talk about, I think, this critically important conversation today. Albertans are a province of immigrants. Rural Alberta is a province of immigrants. At the same time, it is our belief that all rural folks are rural folks. I had a fantastic conversation with a gentleman from Pakistan, was so marveling about rural Alberta. He says, I got to get back to the spaces. I'm living in downtown Montreal. I need to get back to the spaces again. And I think that that's what we need to talk about. At the same time, what comes with that is a need for supports. The fact is Alberta right now is moving forward and is just coming out with immigration strategy. And we actually have talked to the provincial minister related to Mr. Copping. And 2 things that are coming out of that program is a rural renewal immigration stream, which is really looking at pilots for municipalities to get on board, to seeing if we can bring in immigrant investment, immigrant workers as well, and really encouraging new residents to settle in certain areas. The key message to rural Alberta is we are alive and well. We're moving quite quickly, but what comes with that is that we have some depopulation, and we do have some demographic conversations that come with this. So this conversation is critically important to us. What I'm excited about, though, is the rural entrepreneur stream that's being pushed by the provincial government. And the Rural Entrepreneur Stream is really encouraging growing businesses in rural Alberta, having that conversation with rural Albertans where you can actually look for opportunities that are found within rural Alberta. And making those connections between local businesses, whether they're existing or creating new businesses, is a fantastic opportunity. We have many businesses in rural Alberta, mom and pop operations or bigger businesses that immigrant investment and entrepreneurial investment in those can really be favorable to rural Alberta. We ultimately have a lot of programs in place for those supports, and that's the big conversation. Obviously, rural Alberta has a different culture than some of the urban areas. So ensuring that those are supports in place, and that's a key message as I'm probably being grilled on this conversation, is what can be done to make people successful in rural Alberta. We are diverse and forward thinking as rural Albertans. And one of the really big conversations is tied to the fact that we're looking at ways to diversify our economy and our communities as well. Rural Albertan municipalities are home to 18% of the 4 million people live in Alberta. However, we contribute to 24% of the GDP of the province of Alberta. Rural Albertans punch above our weight, and bringing immigrants into that opportunity, ensuring we can leverage that, is very important to us as well. And really, the sustainability of rural Alberta is tied to attracting that qualified workforce, to provide community services and making sure they're having programs in place to retain those workers, those families, those people that want to move to rural Alberta as well. And those community services are really linked to that rural economic and community development conversation. The funding for services make municipalities as attractive as possible. And as surprising as it is, we need to look at rural schools, family and community support service, policing. But interestingly enough, the conversation around immigration is tied to broadband. And we have digital poverty in some parts of rural Alberta. So bridging that gap for broadband allows the immigrants to move to rural Alberta and actually pursue opportunities. And this is essential to rural community building, which involves immigration, involves entrepreneurs, and it involves attracting a workforce too as well. And with that, I think that I can talk quite a bit about specific Alberta programs, but I'm getting close to my 5 minutes here. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak today and gladly answer any questions that are brought up by the chair or any of the members. Thank you.
You have 1.5 minutes if you want to go ahead.
You bet. Well, actually, I'll talk about two streams, the Alberta Immigrant Nomination Program. So that's the ANIP, and people love acronyms, but it has two streams. So it's got a stream for workers and a stream for entrepreneurs. And the Alberta Opportunity Stream, AOS, is a temporary foreign worker program and allows people to actually look for eligible occupations in the province of Alberta. And that's been successful throughout rural Alberta. The stream for entrepreneurs piece is what I'm really excited about, is actually looking at the International Graduate Entrepreneur Stream and allowing qualified international graduates from Alberta post-secondary institutions to operate businesses in Alberta as well. And one of the things too is the beauty of rural Alberta is we have rural economic development authorities, again, looking at diversifying our economies in rural Alberta, and immigration has become one of the pillars of that conversation. So all these rural economic development authorities throughout Alberta are seeing immigration as a key pillar to bring people in, look for investment, and look for a strong workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. We will now proceed to Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the committee for this invitation to speak to you regarding some of the questions I've been asking regarding increased immigration in the short and longer term. Canada is very unique in the world, given the general positive consensus in favor of immigration. Debates and discussions tend to revolve around the details, the levels, the categories, the requirements, the administration, rather than whether immigration is good for Canada. My critique of large increases in immigration levels should be considered in that context. Arguments for increased immigration are largely demographic based, given our aging population. But these arguments often fail to consider other factors along with the global trend of a declining population in most countries. Moreover, evidence indicates that more immigration will not, quote, substantially alter Canada's age structure and impending increase in the dependency ratio, end quote. I have both short and longer term concerns. In the short term, is it really fair from an equity perspective to maintain levels of over 400,000 given the greater impact of COVID in sectors where women, immigrants, and visible minorities are concentrated? How quickly are the hospitality, travel, and retail sectors likely to bounce back? More generally, Will the current downturn be more like the 1990-91 recession and the scarring of immigrant economic outcomes, both in the short and in some cases longer term? Or will it be more like the 2008-9 recession, which left immigrants largely unscathed? Enjoyed listening to the presentation from the Alberta witnesses and their explanation of the importance of immigration in rural areas. But I think we have to recognize that only about 9% of recent immigrants settle outside our major urban areas. So we have to question how realistic is the call for more immigrants to settle outside our major cities and urban areas. While the Provincial Nominee Program and Atlantic Immigration Program have had success, most new immigrants continue to settle in the larger provinces and urban centers. Also, more thinking is needed with respect to sectors and workers who are more likely to be vulnerable to automation, artificial intelligence, and remote work. Will professionals such as accountants, lawyers, and other white-collar occupations become increasingly replaced? What about the cashiers and Amazon packers? And will remote work lead to more offshoring? Will governments invest in the needed public and private infrastructure needed to accommodate such growth, ranging from roads, transit, housing, healthcare, utilities, and parks, as Doug Saunders argues in Maxim Canada? And Canada also has difficulties meeting its climate change commitments. So how likely is it Canada will be able to do so with an insignificant increase in population, given likely further urban sprawl? And furthermore, will the general consensus among provincial governments in favor of more immigration increasingly confront the reality of Quebec's reduced percentage of the Canadian population and thus increasing imbalance between population and representation in our major political and judicial institutions? And how will Indigenous peoples, the fastest growing group in Canada, perceive more interest in increased immigration compared to addressing their socio-economic and political issues that we've been reminded of this past week? But I raise these questions to stimulate a needed discussion on immigration to ensure that we consider both the benefits and costs in a manner that maintains the overall confidence of Canadians in immigration. Immigration is too important to Canada's present and future for these issues to be ignored and merits a full-scale review or commission covering immigration, settlement, and citizenship. Any such review, of course, should include a diversity of views, those supporting increased immigration levels, as well as those who have concerns. I recognize there is a risk of having these discussions, but there is an equal risk of not having these discussions nor raising some of these concerns. And as noted, the worldwide trend is towards declining and aging populations. While Canada may be able to counter this trend in the shorter term, Canada also needs to prepare with a range of policies and programs beyond increases in immigration.
30 seconds left.
And I just like to thank you for your attention. I welcome questions. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Griffith. We will now move to Mr. Chris Ramsarup. Mr. Ramsarup, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and he's representing Gestica for migrant workers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for providing us with the opportunity today to speak before this committee. Justice for Migrant Workers is an activist group based in Toronto, and we've been organizing with migrant workers, particularly farm workers, for the last 20 years. To begin with, we would be remiss not to recognize the deaths of 215 Indigenous children who died as a result of failed, flawed, and racist national residential school policies. It is critical that we take responsibility as a nation for the deaths of thousands of Indigenous children in residential schools, as well as the ongoing genocide that continues. We cannot separate or detach any conversation related to migration and immigration without understanding the history of this nation. Furthermore, we cannot have an honest and thorough conversation about immigration within rural communities without acknowledging that for over 54 years, Canada has maintained and recently expanded a system of indentured labor known as a Seasoned Agricultural Workers Program and the Temporary Foreign Workers Program overall, which enriches rural employers. It's a myth to say that these women and men who have toiled for generations are temporary labor. It's a permanent feature of rural communities that addresses employer needs and simultaneously dehumanizes and disposes of workers when no longer necessary. This week alone, dozens of workers were terminated and returned home to their home countries. Several workers were sent home or repatriated for standing up against workplace injustices, including deplorable housing and dangerous transportation. Other workers complained about living in rodent-infested dwellings, where up to 19 workers living in one accommodation with only 2 working toilets. 10 workers have died this year, with several of these workers dying during the quarantine period, which means under government watch. This is not a tragedy or an exception. A crisis will continue to persist until we address the systemic underpinnings of Canada's temporary foreign worker program, a system that perpetuates an asymmetrical power imbalance tilted in favor of employers. This comes at a time when the agricultural industry export value has increased by approximately 14% over the same period last year, and the numbers of TFWs in the agricultural sectors has increased. Calls for the expansion of these programs that are racist institutional systemic practices, are unacceptable. It's a fundamental failure of government policy where people live and work in communities without the ability to engage in civic, social, and political participation. COVID highlights this, as migrants, both temporary foreign workers and undocumented workers, were viewed as vectors of this disease, and local political rural officials demanded increased action to further surveil and criminalize migrants through increased enforcement from Canadian Border Services and local police agencies. Recently, migrants have been subjected to intimidation in rural Ontario, where White Lives Matter posters have been placed targeting specifically migrant farm workers. Racism is multifaceted and multidimensional. Power is central to understand how it manifests both in rural communities, but in the operations of Canada's TFW's program. A program that values Black and Brown workers only for their labor while denying their humanity is a blight on all of us. It's imperative that we get to the heart of this issue. Tied work permits, the employer nature driven of this program, and the power imbalance where workers are disposed of. For 20 years now, JFRMW has been demanding systemic changes, something that successive governments have failed to address. Recently announced vulnerable work permits, funding, pathways to residency programs are inadequate and have failed to address the deep-rooted injustice that exists for all workers. As we develop immigration plans for the future, it's necessary that you heed our advice, and advice from both current and former workers. Canada cannot hide behind the mask or veneer of multiculturalism while perpetuating a system of apartheid. People across Canada and across the globe are keeping a watchful eye on our next steps. The changes that we want to close with are: 1, ending unilateral repatriations and disbarment for workers. We cannot claim that there is a labor shortage while there are hundreds, if not thousands, of workers who can no longer work in Canada. Equal access to social entitlements. Workers pay into our EI system, they pay into our pensions, but they don't have equal access. Permanent status upon arrival. As it's been saying, we gave this beforehand to the Dutch and the Polish. Only when the color of the skin of the workers changed did we change our immigration policies to say that they were no longer welcomed as equals. And finally, the right to organize. So we shift the power imbalance that exists in this industry. So I would like to close for those are my comments, and I look forward to questions and discussion during the answer period. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And we will now move to our round of questioning. Mr. Hallen will start our first round of questioning of 6 minutes. Mr. Hallen, you can please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'll start my round of questionings to Mr. McLaughlin. I'm a fellow Albertan living here in Calgary. I came here as an immigrant and also was a small business owner, so I really connected with a lot of stuff that you were saying. When it comes to some of the entrepreneurship programs that you said Alberta is introducing, where do you see most of those, like what sectors do you see most of those jobs coming in?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hallen. And I think that really looking at, I think if one thing COVID's taught us is actually food security. But at the same time, we are price takers and not price givers. And you as a business person understands the realm that Alberta is in. Value add agriculture, actually looking for agriculture that actually is a global agriculture. So processing of lentils and all of the other protein alternatives. At the same time, value add to our whole agricultural sector. There's fantastic immigrant folks that have experience in that. They can bring that knowledge to rural Alberta. And that is really should be a focus for rural Alberta, is the value-add agriculture and the brilliance of the entrepreneurs that can bring to that business and those opportunities, not just at the local national scale, but actually looking at the global scale. So hopefully that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. There's another question for you, Mr. McLaughlin, that I'm sure that Quebec is having the same issues, and Ontario as well. And it's about how do we retain people when they come to rural areas? How do we retain them? Like what pathway do you see for that?
Well, one of the views that's been taken by a few communities, and I think there's some examples that Medicine Hat, Jasper, Red Deer, Arma, Wood Buffalo, Sylvan Lake, they've actually looked at it as actually the community inviting these people to their community. So actually making it a community priority to be welcoming, and not just welcoming by gift bags and here's a logo, but welcoming by integrating that community. And I've seen this. I've actually seen this. The town of Ponoka has a fabulous, strong Filipino entrepreneurial community, and that community has been embraced by the community. And I think that's the big conversation, is that there needs to be a way to have that community actually bridging that gap, inviting people in and genuinely exchanging. And it needs to be really that community prioritizing being welcoming in the most genuine sense.
Thank you. Last question to you, Mr. McLaughlin, before I move on, is, what do you see are some of the things that are holding back immigrants once they come here?
Well, I think it's really a situation where what is rural Alberta? I mean, the vastness of rural Alberta, and I can speak probably as rural Canada, we are vast, and actually packaging in such a way to show what opportunities are here. When I actually talk about even the farmland I own in perspective to other countries, I am a massive farmland owner based on the acreage I have. It's just really what the value is. So really dollar for value, opportunity that's available. The climatic opportunities are here. I think there might be this view that rural Alberta is this vast snowy wasteland, but in fact, high producing, high value add, high opportunity area. And it's really the packaging that opportunity, I think, in a way that allows people to understand how amazing rural Canada is.
Thank you. So next, I'd like to ask Mr. Griffiths, given the current numbers that are being projected, especially for upcoming, and we've seen the program that just went by right now, are you concerned at all about basically what we're already seeing in this mess of backlogs and what's going to happen to processing for all these new announcements?
Well, I think one always has to be concerned about processing and announcements, just because it's the nature of the beast, as it were. I mean, I do think that, however, the government probably is reasonably comfortable that they can meet their targets, or at least make progress towards their targets, and that the processing capacity will be there. But that's looking from the outside rather than looking from inside. My concerns are more, are the levels appropriate in the current context when you've had a large number of immigrants, visible minorities, and women who have been affected and lost their jobs? That's my broader concern.
Thank you for that. And just going off on some of the stuff that you were talking about, one area I'd like to touch on, if you could comment on that, is, do we have adequate supports when people come here, like resettlement supports, or what do you see for that with the influx of more people coming in?
Well, Canada overall has, very well developed integration and settlement programs, probably some of the strongest in the world. And I think that partially is reflected in how well immigrants do here. But you have more people coming in, of course, the demand will always be increased. And of course, we also know that you can never completely satisfy the demand. There just isn't the money and everything like that. So I think what we also have to look at is, are there other ways to provide supports in addition to sort of to the in-person stuff, which is very important, and language training, but are there other more alternative or innovative ways of doing that? And there may have been some experimentation taking place during the time of COVID when people couldn't sit in places in person.
Thank you. And you touched on a little bit about infrastructure and for when
Mr. Helen, you have about 10 seconds, so if you can wind up.
What are your concerns about the infrastructure that we currently have? Are we able to support people that are coming in?
Well, I grew up in Toronto, and my experience is colored by that. The subway network that I grew up in about 20, 30 years ago has largely unchanged. I drive through Toronto and I see the infrastructure hasn't taken place.
Griffin,
so I
if
think
you can just
anyway,
sum it up quickly. Your time is up.
I have concerns on infrastructure, just given the nature of the needs.
Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Dhaliwal. Mr. Dhaliwal, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank and welcome all the presenters. My questions will go to President McLaughlin. President, I'm one of the fellows that migrated to Canada, and my first stop was in Alberta. I went to Southern Alberta Institute of Technology and then University of Calgary. And my first job was, in fact, in a rural setup in Vermilion and Bakerville when I worked with the Alberta Transportation. And as we heard from Mr. Griffiths, most of newcomers to Canada tend to settle in and around higher populated cities, and most of which are cities that are already home to large immigrant communities. Could I hear your thoughts on how the smaller communities compete with larger cities to attract and retain newcomers, even though you gave one example, if you can elaborate, and how can small rural communities promote themselves abroad?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think this really becomes that rural economic development, that need for diversification, really having that conversation. And again, looking at immigration as one of the pillars on promoting economic diversification in rural Alberta or for rural Canadians. And I think that really you're exactly right. The typical immigration model is you move to the city, you see close to your community, but at the same time, we are in a global world right now. And the fact is that the skills, the technology, and the education is so transferable. The fact is that if you want someone to come to a community, you got to make sure that the family's happy. And so it's really looking at the quality of the schools and having that conversation. We've experienced this too locally. I live on a farm. I live close to a town, but it's really actually looking at attracting. Two of the critical pieces we have in rural Alberta is we have a shortage of doctors, and we are getting into a crisis place with veterinarians. To attract great doctors and great veterinarians, you need to actually look at leveraging our community, selling our community, and making sure that people understand that rural Alberta is fantastic. But the one thing that's happening right now, and I know your time is short, rural Alberta is actually seeing an exodus from the folks. If there's one positive thing that's happened with COVID, people have realized that I can actually be in a different part of the world, make a living, look for great opportunities, and live that quieter life that rural Alberta holds. And that exodus is truly happening right now. And I think that we can start looking at that as an opportunity to attract immigrants to rural Alberta and rural Canada.
It's my understanding, many of the rural municipalities are also facing demographic challenges of aging populations and outward migration. In your view, which rural regions are most vulnerable to these demographic trends, and how can our immigration system best address these types of challenges?
Yeah, thank you. I think that really we have inverted pyramids in rural Alberta. We have our small towns, and any town that's under the size of 5,000, without even looking at the statistics, I will tell you that it's a pyramid. You have a larger aged population and the opportunities for the youth. And one of our conversations always is we want our kids to stay home. In order for our kids to stay home, we want to look at opportunity. But what comes with that too, and the immigration conversation is interesting, is it actually pulls in that investment. It starts to regrow these communities. I've seen communities die all throughout rural Alberta. At the same time, I've seen communities grow. And the ones that grow really start to look at that whole conversation is we need to attract, we need to invest, we need to look for opportunity. And that opportunity, I think if you look for opportunity for us keeping our kids home, is the same opportunity, the same conversation to attract immigrants to rural Alberta. And I think it's the same package, the same conversation, the same set of services, and the same set of support and the same opportunities as well.
And the annual immigration levels are determined by the federal government with consultation with the provinces and territories. In your view, is there, local municipalities been involved in these discussions in your area, or what type of input especially important for municipalities to contribute to federal government when we set up those levels?
Yeah, we are starting to have the conversation at the provincial level, and this would be the first contact we've had at a federal level. But definitely looking at this conversation, the fact that we again are 18% of the population. In order for us to be successful, we need to grow and look for opportunities. So being part of that conversation where immigration starts to look at the repopulation or bringing the opportunities in, I think is an important conversation. We've just started the conversations at the provincial level. The immigration strategy has not been released. It is coming this summer, but we have been identified as a key stakeholder working with the province of Alberta and Minister Coping out of the Alberta provincial government.
You think universities and post-secondary education institutes can play a role attracting people to rural Alberta?
100%. Actually, Olds College has a tremendous immigrant populations, the agricultural schools. So I think that our education program in Canada is so great that is one of our assets we need to leverage and also tie in those pieces to agricultural value add, resource-based economy, and allow people to identify opportunities in rural Alberta for sure. I agree.
And you mentioned veterinarians and doctors. What can the government do to make sure that, federal government particularly, to help you with those shortages?
For sure. I think I would love to talk about the doctor's part, but the vet conversation is a critical issue. We need to look at better ways to actually provide that service. Large animal producers in rural Alberta are having troubles actually keeping their business alive if they do not have a vet. That is a key part of the value chain, a key part of your ability to grow livestock, and we require those services. So I think it's a critical component. It's odd to argue for vets over doctors, but that's what Alberta is about. We need both, but right now we're getting to a crisis with veterinarians.
Thank you, Mr. Dhaliwal. Your time is up. We will now proceed to Madame Normandin. Madame Normandin, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Griffith. Statistics show that new arrivals take about 10 years to meet that unemployment, the same unemployment, and perhaps they are less resilient in a time of crisis. So perhaps we should examine our capacity to integrate and to ensure better resiliency for them so that they can reach the same employment level as the rest of the population. And perhaps going into a smaller region might be a better idea for them to reach the same employment levels as the locals. Thank you for your question.
The question is sort of like a supply-demand kind of question, if I understand it correctly. And in the past, of course, and also currently, most immigrants end up in the major urban centers and pass by, in many cases, the smaller centers where, in fact, they may have more unique skills in relation to the population where they may be able to do better. So when I sort of look at the macro trends and say still, 90% plus are going to the major centers, I don't discount the importance of the smaller centers or the work that they're doing in Alberta or elsewhere, because even if you can attract a relatively smaller number of people to the rural areas, they can have a very important and significant impact in those communities where the labor needs are there. The other point I would mention is that that's partially in terms of retention issues. Family class immigration can also play a part there, because if somebody comes on their own, they may move after a number of years. If their family or other family members are there, they're more likely to stay.
Merci beaucoup. Ma prochaine question.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. McLaughlin. You talked about digital poverty, and we're talking about high-speed internet. Am I writing that it's going to help entrepreneurs and farmers? I would like to know what you believe about this. Could this attract immigrants but also stop the exodus of the population?
Fabulous question, and I'm going to try to contain myself on how passionate I speak about this topic, because I believe this is a conversation around opportunity. And when I use the word poverty, I only use that to shock, in as much as that I think we're missing opportunity by not looking at the whole conversation around broadband, I think, as a charter right. I think we need to start looking at it that should be that important to the foundation. Rural Alberta we see a tremendous gap. We see 10 down, 1 up. That's like you hear that old dial-up internet in your head when you're talking about speeds that are that slow. So I know it's hard, I think, to keep talking about broadband in context, but it is. Because if one thing COVID has taught us is that it doesn't matter place always, it matters about ideas. And I think that if we can actually bridge that digital divide, we can create new places and new opportunities that are really still tied to those ideas. And I think it's very tied to this immigration conversation. So thank you for that.
Merci beaucoup. Une autre question.
Thank you. Another question on the type of immigration. Often in regions, schools have a hard time having the number of students required. Could we invite families with younger children?
That is an excellent question. You're obviously very connected to the rural components of your constituency, because if a school dies, if a school closes, the community loses a lot. And you're exactly right. The fact is that you have this depopulation in some areas, and immigration as looking at it as a way to actually bring these schools and make sure that they're sustained, I think is critically important. Those are easy areas to find, and I think those are areas that can be focused on. So I think it's a fantastic idea. I've been around long enough to see schools close, and it is so damaging to the culture and the entire community. So I think it's an excellent opportunity, I do believe.
Parfait. Je vous reviendrai avec d'autres questions.
Thank you. I'll come back to you with more questions on my second round, but I have a question for Mr. Sarro regarding the quality of welcome of foreign workers. Often there are two levels of government that are responsible for the quality of accommodation. There's the federal government, but there's also the provincial government with health and safety. Should there be one level that examines the safety of accommodations?
Thank you very much for that question. Merci beaucoup. There is definitely a concern in Ontario. We're saying that occupational health and safety laws or residential tenancies acts of each jurisdiction or each province should be the area responsible for housing. What's happening is we've got this jurisdictional football where at the end of the day, no government is taking responsibility to protect the interests of temporary foreign workers. Let's think of this as part of the national housing crisis. When we're thinking about local income communities, migrant workers are subjected to precarious and deplorable conditions as equal as other peoples. So simultaneously at the federal level, let's think about a housing a right for all, but the provincial jurisdictions to provide the enforcement and the legislative protections for the workers.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, that's fine. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. My first question is to Chris, if I may. The issue always comes back to say that we can't really have temporary foreign workers come with landed status on arrival, because if they did, they would leave the community. So I wonder, what suggestions might you have to actually bring in the workers right from the beginning, giving them full status and also support them to stay in the community?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. If we look previous components of our history with the Dutch farm workers that came, they came with full status. Many of them have laid roots in the communities, and many of them are farmers today. It's about providing the settlement supports. It's about providing the resources. And, every week I get calls, and the most angering over the last couple of weeks was I had a gentleman who's worked for over 30 years in rural Ontario. 30 years of working tied to an employer. And he's asking, when will he have the opportunity to live here as an equal resident? So it's providing the resources to support the infrastructure and saying that these workers shouldn't be simply seen as labor. They should be provided with permits, open permits, and the ability to move and to go from different places. The situation the Trinidadian workers, as all of you were involved in trying to address, we had a situation where workers were facing in the winter months a crisis because of the tied work permit process. Many of the workers, we have to remember, are skilled farmers in their home country, whether we're talking about Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, the Philippines, Thailand. Many of these people come from rural communities. Their skills and specialization are in agricultural labor. And it's time that we give them the opportunities to provide and become as equals with us.
Thank you for that. Since the COVID exposure with the explosive report on the plight of migrant workers. Not that those issues weren't actually happening, but it really just got brought to light because of COVID. Has there been improvements with respect to that? And then to the question about attracting and retaining workers in rural communities, what must the federal government do in that regard, especially in light of the explosive reports?
In our experience, no, nothing has changed. The structure of the program continues, the tied work permit. The fact that this weekend, we were dealing with dozens of workers who were repatriated. Many of these workers went from one terrible situation to another terrible situation. The fact that we're able to just use this program as a revolving door of disposable labor is unacceptable. So workers continue to live under deplorable conditions. Workers continue to send us pictures of pesticides and chemicals in the workplace. Workers continue to tell us about contractors and recruiters that are charging exorbitant fees. So I think it's about removing these hindrances, these unnecessary restrictions on mobility, ensuring that they have access to EI onto our social safety net as equal workers, and to recognize once again that, as I said before, these are rural workers from rural communities in the global south. They have the expertise and the knowledge to share within our communities. And from many of the workers I've known, they have such a long attachment. Over 80% of workers have a strong attachment to rural Ontario, rural Quebec, rural Alberta, rural BC. And, there's a mythology, the two mythologies, that this is a temporary nature, it's a permanent, and that the second component is that workers are just simply going to leave and go to an urban setting, particularly when they have lived in rural settings their entire lives here in Canada.
Should the government then be bringing forward an immigration stream with particular different labor demands? For example, caregivers would be one that comes to mind. Agriculture would be another, instead of relying on the temporary foreign workers system, but create a specific immigration stream targeted with the workers that you're talking about, with the talents and experience and knowledge base that they have, and to then bring them in under that new stream. We currently don't have that stream. Should we have that immigration stream now?
We have to value the working class communities that have been coming to Canada. So these are these workers for generations from Mexico and the Caribbean. The concern is, if we think about abolishing the program, my concern is that all these workers who've contributed for decades will be left out, and we'll use racial ideas to try to exclude them. So the challenge is, how do we create a system of permanent immigration status that recognizes, acknowledge, and respect the contributions of workers who've already helped to build our society? So it's developing a stream of immigration that respects, but also doesn't criminalize or racialize or dehumanize people based on racial characteristics.
Canada used to have an immigration stream that speaks to the full range of skill sets. And what it used to be defined as high, medium, and low. And of course, these workers that we're talking about today are essential workers in many ways. They help put food on the table. They are incredibly important to our economy, but to our well-being on the whole. And so should Canada be bringing back for a immigration stream that provides for a full range of workers?
I think quick 30-second answer.
I think it's to acknowledge and recognize that we need to expand immigration policies, and to also understand how the connection between the racialization of labor, particularly in agriculture. So farm workers have never have the ability to live here as permanent residents. If we do go forward with that, it's about recognizing that the skill and the value of the skill that they contribute to our society.
Your time is up. Thank you. We will now proceed to our second round of questioning based on the time left. Mr. Soroya, you will have 3 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all the witnesses for their wisdom and enlightening us from their view. My question is for Andrew and Paul. For both of you, I arrived here 47 years ago yesterday, and I came to a absolutely white Canada. The immigrants has done very well, so is Canada. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say it. I even heard those where the immigrants go home or whatever the whole thing is. The whole thing changed. Most of the people who come to the country, they done very well. They're willing to work hard. They're willing to do anything and everything. The cities are done very well with the new immigrants. The same thing, we need to move it to the rural Canada, rural Alberta, rural whatever. And what can be done? We can bring the people in. How could you keep those people back in the rural Alberta, rural Canada? Have both of you or anybody can tell us your opinion?
I can answer very quickly, and I think that really, and thank you for that, and that's great. 47 years, and you've seen the change in Canada too as well. And I think that rural Alberta wants to exactly prosper by immigration. I mean, we've seen that in the urban centers, and I think that it's really developing that two-way street. It's really showing how communities can prosper. For them knowing that the cultural diversity they can experience in rural Alberta, rural Canada has opportunity to grow from those communities too as well. And I think that raising the awareness that those opportunities are available from both parts, I think is great, and showing and really showcasing rural Canada as an opportunity for that immigration, for actually building those communities. And the fact is that I think that if you create that framework, we're looking for bridging that gap, and there's fantastic examples, and I wish I had more time, but there's actually the rural and northern immigration pilot, which is really bridging those communities to immigrants and opportunities. There's actually YMCA of Northern Alberta is actually looking at a settlement services for Wood Buffalo region, making it more welcoming, making it understanding, making sure that they're having those conversations. So I think there's examples out there, and really taking those successes and actually looking at them at a larger scale, I think is an opportunity.
I think you have less than 30 seconds left. I have a quick question. In the last 5 years, the Atlantic Settlement Program has done pretty well in the last 5 years, 4 years. Would that work for you in your case?
And I'll apologize, I don't know the details of it by every guest though, as someone who's been in rural Eastern Alberta, Eastern Canada. I think that it's a fabulous opportunity. So it's again building upon those, and I'll have to dig deeper into those opportunities. But it was brought up, I know, when the Alberta was creating their policy. That is a win and a success program, and I have every expectation that that'll be adopted under the Alberta provincial government, looking at the wins or the successes in that program too as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Shifke. Mr. Shifke, you will have 3 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, et un gros merci à tous.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to thank our witnesses for being here with us tonight, or today.
Mr. McLaughlin, first of all, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to say this at the outset just so that my mother approves. She was born in Calgary. My grandparents actually, when they arrived in Canada, boarded a train from Halifax, made their way out to Alberta, and like many other newcomers, made their way back to a large city, in this case, Montreal, which allows me to cheer for the Montreal Canadiens, so I'm fine with it. That being said, we're really looking at ideas, ways in which the federal government and all governments can be more successful in ensuring that immigrants feel more welcome and are retained in the rural communities who really need them for their prosperity and for so many other reasons. So I guess I have 2 questions for you. First is, what role do municipalities have in ensuring that newcomers have supports and feel welcome and integrated, and what more can the federal government do in supporting them in that regard? And I'm going to leave all the remaining time for you to just share ideas. What's going on in Alberta from an idea perspective that may be interesting and effective across the country?
Great. Well, thank you for giving me so much time. And if someone likes to talk, I do appreciate that. And I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan too. I'll throw that in too as well. But I think that really the conversation goes around where the energy is. And I think that really one thing that COVID has taught us, and we're still not there yet, but what COVID has taught us is the importance of food security. And I've said that already, but it's so critically important. It's so critically important for us to look beyond being price takers and price givers. And the fact is that we can actually look at immigrants to actually be the ideas, the passion, the energy that actually can drive the opportunities. And I think that really what comes with that is a conversation tied to happy wife, happy life. I cannot move to a place unless my wife is happy. Some of you folks, your spouse or your partner, they need to be happy. So it's not just a place, it needs to be a thing. It needs to actually have all those services. And I think really when you start looking at education, opportunity, broadband, at the same time, looking for the fact that you can actually be educated in any part of the world on any topic. And the fact is that you can still live in a beautiful, welcoming community that's quiet. You can still hear birds chirping, though I do know there are birds in Montreal. The fact is that that lifestyle shift, I think, is attractive to immigrants too as well. And again, I've met thousands of people in my life that you can tell someone that's rural because, and there's a lot of folks that want to go back to rural, and I'm expecting that a lot of people will go back to rural in this change and shift in our population too as right now. I think rural Canada is been our past. I think it's our future. And I think if your immigration program concentrates on the fact that rural Canadians punch above their weight, you'll get the same immigration in those areas with the same people with the energy, drive, and ideas.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
You are almost done now. It's done. You have your 3 minutes. So we will now proceed to Madame Normandin. Madame Normandin, you will have 2 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, I am going to give you the floor again. One of my colleagues just tabled a bill in the House to give a tax credit to students who return to the regions. Quebec had considered something like that. Do you think that that might be an interesting measure for immigrants to have a tax credit?
I think that's an excellent idea because I think, again, I can speak with passion about what it is like to be a rural Canadian. And I think that two programs, the self-employed farmer stream, so looking for building opportunities to identify, using a tax benefit to actually attract folks, to begin that discussion, to begin the ideas. There's a foreign graduate startup visa stream, which is looking at economic immigration and tying that back to graduates, tying that back to immigrants with the higher skill set and the experience, whether they're educated in Canada or elsewhere. I think we need to start to bridge that gap. The one thing I'm always concerned about is that I think that we need to start to level our education systems and not use our education system in Canada as a wedge or as a disadvantage to immigrants. We need to start to bridge that gap. I've worked with engineers and scientists from around the world that have been educated in different centers, and we need to bridge that gap between our Canadian education system. I think that's critically important, and I think using incentives and those type of outside the box thinking, I think is critically important to that discussion too as well.
Merci beaucoup et j'aimerais vous en...
Thank you. And what would be the role of organizations that look for immigrants and bring them to the regions, and they are a support network for them? Could they support them more?
Quick 20-second answer.
I'll go really fast. Local solutions for local problems. I think that the federal government can really look for the overarching opportunity, but look for the boots on the ground. The people that know the community, that know the ideas, whether they're local politicians or the local influencers in a community. And we've had influencers in small communities even before the internet showed up. But it's really looking at those opportunities for the local solutions to the local problems. Those are the ones that can connect. Rural municipal leaders are aggregators, they're consolidators, and really we can start to pull those together.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now end our panel with Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much. Just want to build on that last question, actually, in terms of resettlement services, support network that is required to attract and to retain workers in rural communities. Chris, I'd like to just come to you. You know, from your perspective, and you're working with the workers themselves, what are they saying? What do they need for them to stay in Canada?
Thank you for that. There's a couple of things that they've told us, that they want to live as equals, they want decent housing, they want decent wages, they want fair working conditions, and they want to be treated in respect by their employers and by the community and to the extent to the government. So it's about providing the resources to ensure that they could prosper and live as equals. And that's what we hear day in and day again, that they don't want to be treated as disposable or as garbage, but they want to be reflected. And it's about valuing the skills that they're bringing to the table. Farm workers are proud to be farm workers. They are proud to be producers. They're proud to grow fruits and vegetables. And many of the workers I know will continue to do so if we treat them as equals. and to stop a system where people are tied to an employer and are not denied the access to residency that they deserve. I heard one of the other colleagues mention that they've been here for 47 years. Why do we exclude and deny other people who have built our society the same benefits as some of us have received as immigrants and as firstborn Canadians? It's not right and it's not fair.
30 seconds left, Ms. Kwan.
I guess for that 30 seconds, finally then to say, word of mouth, if Canada actually reflect those supports that you're talking about, would it then not also attract people back home for the workers and for them to invite others through word of mouth? Would that have an effect?
I think there's definitely a possibility of that, but it's once again thinking about the hundreds, if not thousands of workers who previously worked in Canada. That is not thinking about the current workers, but many workers through no fault of their own are not able to work in Canada again. So it's ensuring that many of those workers also have the ability to come here and to settle roots as well too. And finally, that our immigration laws are not to be used by employers to divide workers based on race.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsarup. With this, our panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of this committee, I would really like to thank all our witnesses for taking out the time and appearing before this committee. So if there is something which you were not able to bring it to committee's attention, you can always send in some written submissions and we will take that into consideration. So with this panel comes to an end and I will suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the witnesses for this panel to leave and allow the clerk to do the sound checks for the second panel. So the meeting is suspended for 2-3 minutes and we will start as soon as the witnesses for the second panel are done with the sound checks. Thank you.
Witnesses.
I would like to welcome our witnesses for this panel as we continue our study on the economic imperative and long-term importance for small rural municipalities outside of major cities to retain new immigrants. For this panel, we are joined by Century Initiative, being represented by Lisa Lalande, Chief Executive Officer, and also John Meadow, Policy and Research Advisor. Our second witness for today is Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission, being represented by Emily Lauzon, Workforce Development Officer, and Piru Pucci, Supervisor, Economic Development. Thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. Welcome, and we are really looking forward to this discussion. The witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks. So Ms. Lisa Lalande, if you can please proceed, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will be going into round of questioning.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you this afternoon. I am here as the Chief Executive Officer of Century Initiative, and I'm joined by my colleague, John Meadow. We're a nonpartisan network of Canadians from the business, academic, and charitable communities. We share the belief that with the right approach to growth, Canada can enhance our economic strength and resilience here at home and our influence abroad. We also share a vision of a Canada that thinks and plans not just for today, but or not for the next election cycle, but for future generations of Canadians, because prosperity takes planning. And our planning must include a smart approach to immigration. Canada is at a crossroads. Our population is aging, our workforce is shrinking, and the need for skilled labor is growing. At the same time, our population growth is sitting at its lowest level in over 100 years due to COVID-19. This represents a significant threat to Canada's long-term economic health and prosperity. It means fewer tax dollars to support programs and services like healthcare, our schools, our roads, public transit, and social services. Over time, that will contribute to a decline in our quality of life, our standard of living, and the cultural fabric of our country. Simply put, we have a choice to make. We can manage our growth or manage a decline. If we choose the former, and the fact that we are here before you suggest this committee has, then immigration must play a central role in our plans. Immigration is critical to growing our population. Immigration will contribute to reducing the burden on government revenues that fund healthcare, old age security, and other services. It would also mean more skilled workers to meet our labor market needs. It would contribute to innovation, and it would fuel entrepreneurship. This is why last fall, Century welcomed the government's 2021 to 2023 immigration level plan, which represents a significant increase over the previous targets. A recent Scotiabank analysis showed that meeting our immigration targets would add billions of dollars to Canada's economy by 2023. We must ensure that we stay focused on achieving these targets. And we must also be deliberate about identifying and attracting skilled immigrants who meet the country's labor market needs, not just for today, but for the jobs of tomorrow as well. And of course, we must also ensure that as a country, we're fulfilling our family reunification and humanitarian commitments. But regardless of what draws immigrants to Canada, we must also support them so that they can succeed and fully contribute to the country's social and economic life. Earlier this year, Century Initiative released our national scorecard on Canada's growth and prosperity. The scorecard is a unique new tool that we created to help Canada policy and decision makers track our progress in growing the country's population. It takes a holistic view, tracking a range of factors that together will contribute to smart, sustainable population growth. For instance, it shows that Canada remains among the top countries in the world when it comes to our international reputation, and that most immigrants report high levels of life satisfaction. These are powerful tools that we can use to attract people to Canada. But the scorecard also shows that we can do a better job of supporting communities across the country to attract and retain immigrants. This includes in smaller rural communities. In this regard, we know that while our immigration retention rates are generally high, in the 5 provinces with the lowest retention rates, on average, almost half of immigrants left within 5 years to other provinces. We need to better understand why and then develop strategies for attracting them to communities that are desperate to grow and to benefit from the social and economic contributions they make. That will require a coordinated and sustained effort between federal, provincial, and municipal levels of government. To date, there have been some successful programs in that regard. The Provincial Nominee Program, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, which is now permanent, and the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program. They're all examples of targeted programs to allow provinces to select economic immigrants. Canada has also indicated its intention to focus on locally driven economic immigration through the Municipal Nominee Program. Century Initiative welcomes this commitment to community-level engagement, which will help meet local needs. We need to ensure this work continues. While Canada has some challenges that must be addressed if we want to benefit from greater immigration, we are in a fortunate position. Support for immigration in this country is generally high. We need to sustain that support through community-level conversations, which can help local residents see immigration as a key part of their future. And we need the political will to take the steps required for smart population growth. We look forward to the government's response to the committee's work. These steps and others are essential to ensuring the benefits of immigration are widely shared across Canada. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. Thanks a lot for your opening remarks. We will now proceed to Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission, and it seems that Ms. Lozon will be starting off.
I'll be starting first, and then Ms. Lozon.
Okay, Mr. Pucci will
some
start.
quick opening remarks.
Yeah, you will have both of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, so you can please proceed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. The CDC, for short, for make it easier for everyone, is pleased to appear before the committee and discuss the impact of the RNIP program on the city of Thunder Bay. In 2019, Thunder Bay was selected amongst 11 communities to participate in this program. In early 2020, we launched the program. Obviously, it was a bit delayed because of the pandemic, but we have met many of our targets that we did establish in 2020. My colleague, Emily Lozon, will provide more details into that part of the program. You're muted, yeah. Go ahead, Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. It's really exciting to be part of what's going on in Thunder Bay right now. I have firsthand experience working with the international students when the kind of international student boom happened at Lakehead University here in Thunder Bay, and then moved over to working for Northern Policy Institute, helping to bridge some of the gaps for temporary workers in Thunder Bay. And then that rolled into the development of the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, and now so working at the CEDC, actually seeing a solution happen in Thunder Bay for many of the international students that have come to Thunder Bay has been really amazing. You know, I'm kind of new to the CEDC, but working on this pilot has been very eye-opening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about how the pilot's going in Thunder Bay.
Thank you. And we will now go to our round of questioning. We will start our first round of questioning with Mr. Seaback. Mr. Seaback, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Great. Well, I'm going to first start off by Emily taking you up on your offer there. Why don't you explain to us how the pilot is going and how it's working?
So in Thunder Bay, we got started with the pilot. It launched officially November 2019. We got started with our first round of recommendations in about April of 2020. That was due to a number of factors. One, the MOUs were being negotiated with each of the communities, so we didn't really get started until after the MOUs had been finalized. And the second part was when COVID kind of hit Canada, we had to kind of rethink how we were going to manage this program. It was primarily a paper-based program. And then, you know, all having to switch to working from home, both at IRCC and at the Thunder Bay CEDC. We had some challenges in kind of getting it up and running. So once we got it rolling in April, we found that there was a very positive response. We weren't surprised to see that most of the interest was coming from or most of the success, I want to say, was coming from the kind of local pool, those who were graduated and already living in Thunder Bay and had a desire to stay here. And then also immigrants or temporary residents who were living in other parts of Canada who had skills and qualifications that met the needs of Thunder Bay and were looking to relocate here for work and also for their permanent residency. So in the first year, which we count as being January 1st to end of December 2020, we had recommended 69 principal applicants and their families along with them. 50% of those people were international students, and also 50% of the occupations that were filled were in the healthcare industry, which was really, we were very happy about that. It was very successful in supporting one of our major employers, two of our major employers, St. Joseph's Care Group and the Thunder Bay Regional Hospital, with RPNs, RNs, and PSWs. So we were really excited about that. So far this year, we've nominated or recommended rather 53 principal applicants. So we're already almost at the same amount that we did in the entire first year. Because I think that we have like a really kind of a better sense of how the program goes, what the story of an application is like, and how it gets from point A to the end a lot better. So we're doing a lot better at the processing element of it, and we have a lot of support from the employers in Thunder Bay.
So when you look at the numbers that you're talking about, 69 in the first year, and I think you said 53 halfway through this year, how many would you ideally, where would you ideally like to see the numbers at? What's the size of the program?
The size of the program, ideally, I think that in terms of, it's a great question because, you know, sky's the limit, but also having a small team that are managing the pilot from the CEDC also limits the amount of intake that we can do. So we feel that 150 to 200, potentially 250 is a really good range to be able to work with for this pilot. You know, we weren't disappointed at all by having 69 applicants in the first year. We thought that that was a very realistic goal, and one that we met very easily with the local pool. It's also something that we have to think about, like, you know, tapping the local pool in the first year was very easy, and then there was a shift, right? You know, there was a shift. We've seen about half of the applicants this year actually be people who have never set foot in Thunder Bay. We have more employers that are coming out now saying, you know, I haven't been able to find anyone. You know, is it okay if I start looking at people who are overseas? And we're like, yes, of course. So right. It's about half and half right now. But yeah, in terms of numbers, we think that that's a pretty good range, a manageable range for us to be processing applications for.
And would you see this pilot being replicable for, you know, even smaller jurisdictions than than Thunder Bay, compared to some of the municipalities in my riding? They're significantly smaller. Would you see it as being downscalable so they'd be able to manage it? You know, because complexity and other things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. I think that it is something that can be replicable in smaller communities, because, you know, the scale of the community and the need is also kind of compatible with the size of the community, right? So Thunder Bay is quite large. We're still small, but we're bigger than some of the smaller communities that also need to benefit from immigration. And maybe there could be, you know, with the IRCC's support, they do have the directed community service channel that we receive a lot of support from when it comes to more complicated applications and issues. And as long as that support is being provided to the smaller towns as well, in helping to make decisions about who to select and how to select, and meeting the needs, then I think that it is something that would be replicable and something that is desired as well.
I know I'm almost out of time. Can you share some documents with the committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, just I think it'd be good for the committee if they can share whatever documents or some process with us if you haven't shared everything already.
Yes, yes, all the witnesses, if there is something which you want to bring it to committee's notice and you didn't get an opportunity today, you can always send us notes and stats on that.
Sure.
So we will now proceed to Ms. Tillen. Ms. Tillen, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my first question will be for Ms. Lauzon. Just if you can maybe tell us a little bit how we can expand the lessons learned through the RNIP to other communities and how we can work with other communities to help develop their settlement sector at the same time.
Piero, I don't know if that's maybe a better question for you.
Yeah, thank you for the answer or question, sorry. Yeah, I think with RNIP, it could be something that we actually been looking at. Before RNIP was actually approved, we had looked at expanding it to outside of Thunder Bay. For those who are familiar, Northwest Ontario is quite a large, it's the size of France. We've looked at other communities have reached out to us to be part of the program. At this time, because of capacity issues and because of COVID, it's been decided with IRCC to keep the program in Thunder Bay. But I would recommend expanding it to other communities if possible. As Emily has mentioned, we have found it very successful in targeting certain industries that were in labor shortages in Thunder Bay, and we've had a lot of success with it.
Thank you for that. And do you think that settlement organizations are important in the retention of newcomers in rural communities? And is that relationship even more important when it comes to newcomers not previously having ties to those communities?
Definitely, we have a number of partnerships. I'll mention the agencies like the Local Immigration Partnership, the Thunder Bay Multicultural Association, the Francophone associations. Ironically, we're all in the same block, and so we work very well closely together with them, and we also work very closely with your national student departments at Lakehead University and Confederation College. But they play an important role. I mean, our role is to help fill positions, work with the employers, but those agencies take over, and we fully work closely with them on retention in Thunder Bay.
Thank you so much. And my next question is for Ms. Lalonde. You spoke very eloquently about the need for immigrants, the importance of immigrants. I'd like to maybe cite a few statistics. Right now, there are currently 4 Canadian workers for every retired Canadian, but by 2035, there will be only 2 workers for every retiree. Without immigrants to help support the needs of an aging population, younger Canadians will end up paying more per person to provide the same benefits. Can you speak to this a little bit, please?
Sure. It is at the heart of why Century Initiative as a charity was actually established, to raise awareness around the connection of population growth and immigration and our long-term prosperity. And I'm going to let my colleague John Meadow is here to speak on that point a little bit more. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Yeah, the dependency ratio, which you referred to, is something that we speak about a lot, the number of each working person in Canada supporting each person who is retired. And that is an issue that for which immigration is very critical to address that issue. And the topic we're speaking about today, the retention of immigrants in rural communities, it's even more significant because what we do see is that population aging and population decline is advancing much more significantly in many smaller and rural communities. And that, in fact, there's a divide that's growing between smaller and rural communities and Canada's large cities. So one of the things that's quite important that this committee is addressing is how do we make sure that immigration is really going to benefit the whole country? How do we make sure that that growth in the workforce that we need across the whole country will not just be occurring in Canada's large cities? We've had a great opportunity here today to hear about the implementation of the rural and northern pilot project in Thunder Bay. And I'm really grateful to the CDC representatives here who have walked us through that. I think one thing that's good to point out is that these kind of programs are quite unique in Canada. Internationally, there aren't that many national governments that want to share responsibility for selecting immigrants. Canada is really out ahead in terms of involving communities in the selection of immigrants, and Century Initiative believes that this is a really important trajectory to continue and to keep building upon. And so the opportunity to hear from those who are on the ground really doing it is extremely valuable.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to continue with your organization, Ms. Lalonde or Mr. Meadow. I only have less than a minute to ask you this. There are some people out there who say there's too much immigration, they're taking the jobs away. But according to statistics, 26% of people in Canada are immigrants. Can you please talk to us a little bit about this? Well, workers are, so quickly if you can.
Quick 30-second answer.
Well, sure. Just very quickly, I will say that public opinion, public sentiment research that Century Initiative has commissioned has shown a consistent increase in support for immigration and understanding among Canadians of the critical nature of immigration to the country's future. And similarly, analysis conducted by organizations like the Conference Board of Canada are consistently showing how the effects on GDP growth, on government revenues, on that critical measure of the dependency ratio, which you highlighted initially, those are very much supported by immigration as well. So we think that there's a recognition on the part of Canadians of the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Meadow. Ms. Dillon, your time is up. We will now proceed to Madame Normandin. Madame Normandin, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup. Merci aux deux panels.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists. My question is for both, so I'll be asking the question to both groups. My first question is for Ms. Lalonde. Can you tell us about the knowledge of one of the official languages as an important factor in integration? Because if a person doesn't speak the language, then they'll move to a larger center where there's a community that speaks their language.
Right. Thank you for that question. And I think it touches on, how do you attract and retain newcomers to communities, and then you think about its connection to rural communities. And there was a comment that was made in the previous panel around, what's the role of the government in supporting that? And I think that, one possible solution is also the role that the government can play in informing people before they come, where can they settle, what are the opportunities in this great big country where they can come to, so they're not necessarily coming to certain communities, and they can understand more about the unique aspects of those communities, including language. John, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Well, sure. I would only just reinforce points that have been made by other panelists today about the role of communities in really creating that holistic, welcoming environment. And I think that language can be a really central aspect of that. When local communities are supported to attract immigrants who do speak the local language, that would be a very important factor in retention. And that kind of ability to participate locally in the culture and life and vibrancy of a community would be a key factor.
Merci beaucoup. Je sais pas si Madame Lauzon.
Thank you. Ms. Lauzon, Mr. Pucci, do you have anything to add?
I do. So I think that that's a very, very important question. And it's something that we greatly considered when we were developing our little point system for how we were going to manage the rural and northern immigration pilot. We do look at the language proficiency of the principal applicant, and we also look at the language proficiency in either language, either French or English, of the spouse. And we look at that in terms of us deciding, how successful is that spouse going to be? How isolated might that spouse be when they arrive? It's not, will they be able to enter the labor market right away? Or is that something that we're going to have to work on them with settlement wise? It's part of the consideration. One of the challenges that we face when it comes to the language is that with the rural and northern immigration pilot, most often people are coming in, they're on work permits, and the PR process actually takes a year, with COVID maybe even longer. So in the interim, they do have access to a variety of settlement services. Language proficient or language upgrading is not one of them. So they're still temporary residents, they're still temporary workers while they're waiting for their permanent residence, and they're not eligible to receive the language upgrading, nor are their spouses, until they have their PR card. And I find that really problematic, because it doesn't take long for someone to decide, I'm isolated, I don't like it, I want to go, right? So having, I know we have a couple, they're from Mexico, spouse doesn't speak English, fantastic family, we want them to stay. There isn't really an option right now for settlement provided language upgrading for that spouse. And I think that's problematic.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais continuer avec.
Thank you. Mr. Pucci, perhaps did you have something to add?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, I just look at my own parents when they came to this country in the late 60s, early 70s. They didn't speak a word of English, but they came to Thunder Bay because there was a large Italian population here, and they were able to adapt to the community because of the supports that were on the ground here in Thunder Bay. Very important, and Emily and I have taken it very seriously, working with different groups in Thunder Bay. When we put the application in for the RNIP program, it was amazing the amount of support that we did get from local agencies. But when we do have people coming and approaching us, we quickly reach out to our partners in Thunder Bay, it doesn't matter which ethnicity, and work closely with them to help support RNIP applicants.
Parfait. Merci encore. Avec vous.
Thank you. And again, for Mr. Pucci and Madame Lauzon, are the needs the same when we're talking about temporary workers or temporary residents, and when we're talking about permanent residents? Are the needs the same when we want to keep them in the regions, or is it different?
I can speak to that a little bit. I believe that the needs are the same, but the access to services is completely different. So, everyone needs housing, they need opportunities for career growth, they need services, but temporary residents don't have access to the same services that permanent residents do. We're really happy that settlement services in Thunder Bay can provide a lot of, pre-arrival help, help with getting the health cards, understanding transportation, finding housing. The basic stuff is covered, and they're allowed to access that once they've become part of the program. But temporary residents in general.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Lauzon. The time is up for Madame Normandine. Maybe you will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm just going to give a couple of moments for that answer to be completed. So I think it's important to hear the answer.
Sure, thank you. We have a large pool of temporary residents living in Canada and living in Thunder Bay specifically, who we would really like to help, and we'd really like to support them in staying here. But they don't have access to provincially funded employment programs. They have very little support in accessing co-op work permits while they're in post-secondary studies. I think the percent our university reported on the percent that they had for co-op work permits, and it was very low, which is, that first integration into the workforce stuff. There's just very little opportunities for them in terms of getting those funded services that are supporting them in their resettlement. It's challenging. It's very challenging. And when I worked as the matchmaker, as they called it, with the Northern Policy Institute, we were exploring those gaps for temporary residents, and we found that, immigration and career advising, employment counseling, are two sides of the same coin. You can't do one without the other. You can't have an employment counselor working with a temporary resident who can't also advise them on immigration, and you can't advise a temporary resident on immigration without the career counseling side of things. So those two things are really integral for people that are already living in Canada who want to stay.
Just to build on that, I mean, that is exactly the point that I think from our last panel as well, where some of the witnesses are saying that what Canada really needs to do is to provide landed status on arrival so that they can, in fact, put down the roots, access the services, and be fully supported. And so then, therefore, not only would they come, that they would also stay. Would you agree that part of the issue of what we need to do is to, in fact, change our immigration system to allow for landed status immigrant pathway as opposed to just a temporary pathway?
Is this a question for me?
Yes,
sure.
it is. Sorry,
Okay.
just to build on your answer.
Yeah, I was listening to that discussion and I thought it was very interesting because I do actually wonder about that myself, like the access to the services, whether or not those should just be opened up to people with temporary status or whether or not having the landed status and having access right off the bat. And, you know, there is no kind of barrier to get through in that way. There is this thing that we think about a lot with the RNIP, and it's whether or not once somebody gets their permanent resident status, will they stay? You know, we often talk about screening people who want to come on a work permit because it allows them to be tied to an employer for at least a small amount of time, so that they have a chance to stick around and experience it. We wonder if people would make the choice to move to Thunder Bay if they came with their PR, or would they just decide to go somewhere else right away? So I guess that's kind of an unknown.
It's interesting, actually. We had other witnesses through different meetings who provided information to say, in fact, the workers would want to stay, particularly, for example, in the meatpacking industry, for example, where the employer was very proactive in supporting the employee to find that permanent pathway. And they're saying, in fact, it would be so great if we didn't have to do all of this rigmarole and to have the family stay right from the get-go. The other issue is this as well. For a lot of the migrant workers who come, even if they're able to temporarily bring their families here, and aside from not being able to access the services, for example, if you have children, you actually have to pay foreign student fees, which is almost, you know, is so expensive, right? In terms of that impact for people. And so all those right from the get-go set up as barriers for people, and it's not welcoming right off the top. What are your comments about that?
I think that I have looked into this a little bit as we're trying to help people who are coming on a temporary status with their children. And that is one of the big fears. We've had some people say, I want to stay home until I get my PR. I don't want to come on the work permit because I'm worried about paying international student fees and things like that. What we've learned is that those fees and those decisions are like independently made by the schools. So we know that students of foreign workers in Thunder Bay they're exempt from international student fees. They don't have to pay international student fees. They can apply for an exemption because their family has worker status.
If there's such an exemption, should that not be applied across the board? I mean, if I was a parent, I'd be very worried about it right off the top, and that would be a deterrent for me.
Yeah, it was concerning for me that when they did pre-arrival services with our settlement agencies, that topic was not discussed. It wasn't until they spoke to me and I actually called the university and asked them what were the rules around somebody getting exempt from the international student fees, and I relayed that information back to them. I think that there's maybe not a lot of people talking about what makes a person an international student or what doesn't under the immigration rules. So I think that it would be great if it was across the board, of course.
Yeah, and not just from school to school either, province to province, because again, that does not help the situation at all. Well, thank you very much. I think I saw the
15 seconds
flash the card. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. We will now start our second round of questioning, and we will start that with Mr. Ellison. Mr. Ellison, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Lalonde, I guess my question for you, I know it was talked about, Ms. Lauzon mentioned it, you know, language as being one of the barriers. I mean, you guys have probably looked at a lot of macro stuff. Do you guys have anything, even if it's anecdotal, to indicate which would be more successful. I totally get if you're a student in Thunder Bay and you've had a chance to experience the city and the beautiful, the beautifulness of what it is and all that kind of stuff, that would be more likely to give you an opportunity to want to stay on after school. What are some of the other factors? I realize why we lose a lot of rural people is because they come to the cities where there's a community group or a part of that. So what would be some of the other things that would help make attracting people to rural life more attractive?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a good question. And, I think we heard in the last panel, someone said local problems, local solutions to local problems. And I think that is really important because the issues that arise in specific communities will vary. I'm from a small town. I grew up in Timmins and Kirkland Lake, and I understand how different it is, even from those two different communities. And I think that the comment was made earlier about the role of employers in helping to not only attract a talent, but also to ensure that they're integrated and connected to the community. We know that when local residents are part of the process, and some great examples are surfacing through these provincial pilots, that they have a stake in the program and that they're much more welcoming. And it's much, although support for immigration is high in the country, it's not something that we can take for granted. And it's something that we need to nurture and be aware of. John, you and I have talked about this in the past. Do you want to add to some of the points that I've just made?
Sure. I would just add that, research shows that overall shifting from a focus on why immigrants leave communities towards why they stay really helps a lot. So I think the framing of your question was very positive. And, some of the other comments that witnesses have made today allude to the fact that it really has to be about being a welcoming and supportive place for all members of a household. So, we can't just be thinking about the needs of principal applicants, but also spouses, also children. And, there has been a lot of work in this area. And some of the things that we know is it really can't be overstated how much that kind of community effort to collectively be a welcoming place, which creates positive perceptions of the community. Once immigrants are present, that in turn drives further individuals to choose a community through the presence of family, friends, other immigrants. That combined with good employment opportunities and educational opportunities, and also access to cultural and religious amenities. That's something that's important too. And, I think it also should just be said that people are different, and there are those that desire a small community lifestyle with a lower cost of living, greater access to nature perhaps, and really just as much as we can do to share information about the options that are available to prospective immigrants, the better off we'll be.
Thanks. Mr. Buzzi, you want to add to that? I mean, I get the university town thought process. I mean, we can attract the best and the brightest from around the world. People get a chance to see firsthand our smaller communities. There's probably more of a desire to maybe stick around after that, especially if employment's available. So I guess my question, based on your guys' experience in Thunder Bay then, is obviously employment factors into it, but what I'm hearing it being said by all of you guys is that obviously how welcoming those employers are, how they work for them, and how they make them feel part of the community is also a big part of that.
Yes, it plays an important role. I mean, I think a community has to identify where is the demand, right? So we have, early on, even before RNIP was a thought, we've identified where our major sectors are and what's in demand, and we tend to target and work with partners. Not only in the GTA, but also Winnipeg. Thunder Bay does have, being closer to Manitoba, does have, some, partnerships there we work with in Winnipeg. And we've, been able to, work with that. So it's important to realize what the community strength is and where its jobs are and identify that. And I think that's important to promote, not on a local level, but I think on the national level, if the federal government wanted to help market communities. I think that's, you shouldn't have, and this is, on the tourism side, right? Just a picture of the CN Tower all the time in your videos. Thunder Bay is the 33rd largest city in the country. And, maybe show a picture of the Sleeping Giant once in a while, or, other communities across the country. And that makes a difference, right? that if
sorry for interrupting, time is up, Mr. Puche. We will now proceed to Mr. Sidhu. Mr. Sidhu, you will have 5 minutes for your questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be with us today. My first question is for Madam Lalonde. Ms. Lalonde, to come up with the current immigration levels plan, IRCC engaged and sought perspectives from provinces, territories, and other government departments, municipalities, Francophone and official language minority communities, immigrant organizations, and not-for-profit organizations, as well as academia, employers, industry, and sector councils. From this large list, are there any other sectors you believe should be consulted going forward?
That is a great question. And what we've been advocating for at Century is a shift away from a focus just on the targets and more on how we actually grow the population in a smart, sustainable way, looking at issues of affordable housing, city development, placement outside of city centers, so encouraging newcomers to other communities. And in doing so, that requires planning for the long term and investing in our education system, urban development infrastructure investment, skills development and training. And so in our view, as we're thinking about, one thing I always want to sort of start out when I'm talking about this is that immigration is not an either or. And sometimes when we talk about issues related to housing or GDP per capita, they're often used as an argument against immigration. Our demographic challenges right now are make this a must-have, and it's simple math. We must proceed with immigration. The question is not how much, it's how do we do it and how do we do it well? And I think along those lines, I think that there's an opportunity to have a different type of consultation to link population growth with urban infrastructure and investment discussions for one example, and labor addressing labor market needs. I think that would be really, really valuable.
Thank you for those insights. And Ms. Lalonde, you mentioned immigration targets in your opening remarks. And according to the 2020 annual report, about 58% of permanent residents were admitted to Canada under the economic category in 2019. Now, is this figure in line with your organization's immigration targets? If you can provide some more insights into that as well.
Sure. We've actually worked with the Conference Board of Canada on our population modeling. So Century Initiative has a goal of advocating for a population of 100 million by 2100, which is actually staged increases in line with the current immigration level targets. And we've looked at them broadly, and we haven't actually gone deep in terms of specific classes. And so Century doesn't have a specific position on those, but we've actually advocated for pinning the population growth at about 1.14% of the population, which is right now currently under 1%. And so we've said that we've achieved much greater results in the past. In 1913, we brought in 400,000 people, which represented about 5% of the population. So it's been done before, we can do it again.
Thank you for that. And my next question is for Ms. Lauzon. In December 2018, a study by Statistics Canada found that the economic immigrants in the 2004 and 2009 landing cohorts who initially settled in Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, out of these 93% remained in those three cities 5 years later. The findings also revealed that the initial location decision of economic principal applicants was a very strong predictor of their location years later, as the report says. Do you have any ideas, insights to attract economic immigrants to smaller municipalities? I know Ms. Lalonde touched on this earlier in a question, and I'm hoping to get your feedback as well. I've got 1 minute left, Ms. Lalonde. Am I pronouncing your last name incorrectly?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, sorry, I have to wrap my head around the question. The question is strategies for retaining economic immigrants?
In rural communities.
In rural communities.
Or smaller municipalities.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do have to say about that is that I think that we often think that we're going to draw on the international student pool more so than we actually can. The international students that come here love working here, or they love living here, they love working here, they really do want to stay. And sometimes the opportunities career-wise for their education isn't quite a fit, right? So there needs to be options for retaining them that are not tied to their employment. The way that the rural and northern immigration pilot, it does fill one of those gaps. It does allow them to get jobs and go through this pilot, but often they're overqualified for them. So I do have concerns about that. I wish that there was a way to retain that talent pool.
Thank you, Ms. Lazon. We will now proceed to Madame Normandian. Madame Normandian, you will have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup. En fait, j'aime.
Thank you. I would like to carry on with the question that I had asked Madame Lalonde, Monsieur Nadeau. Should we have different approaches if we are dealing with a temporary resident or a permanent resident? Should we structure our programs with those two differences?
John, I'm going to let you take this one.
Sure. One of the issues that we've been really focused on has been the growth of two-step immigration in Canada. So it used to be that there was much more of a division between temporary residents and permanent residents, with temporary residents in Canada, then leaving Canada, and permanent residents predominantly drawn directly from individuals applying from abroad. One of the things that we've seen is a growth of many, many different programs for temporary residents to apply for permanent residency. And what we've heard today, including in Ms. Lazon's presentation, is the real problem that we have with temporary residents not having access to settlement services. So in a way, our selection programs have gotten out ahead of our settlement programs. The selection programs are looking to temporary residents as a pool of potential permanent immigrants, but the services that we fund to support immigrants are not yet fully accessible to them. So we hear about the issue of, someone who is in the community with potential to stay, needing language training, but not having access. So I would say that there's a lot of potential for settlement support services to catch up in supporting temporary residents that may become permanent residents.
Merci beaucoup et peut-être rapidement chacun des groupes.
Thank you. And perhaps quickly, you might have heard it in the other panel, other incentives, for example, tax credits. What do you believe about that?
Would that be, in the other panel, the reference was to tax credits to settle in specific communities? I think it's an interesting idea, not something that we have explored in depth, but I think it's worth looking at all mechanisms when thinking about how to promote settlement long-term in rural and smaller communities. However, I do think at the same time that most people are really looking at the full package available to them in their life when it comes to their employment opportunities, their educational opportunities, the amenities that a community offers. And I would have some questions about whether a tax credit could fully offset those kind of considerations, which are really core.
Okay, thank you. Your time is up, Madame Normandine. We will now go to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will also have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you. My question, I'm going to direct this question to Ms. Lalonde, if I may. And it really is premised on the notion of retention, and retention, whether you be temporary foreign workers or in fact an immigrant coming into a rural community. And in our last panel, part of the issue, of course, for temporary foreign workers is that if they don't have access to full status, they are already at a disadvantage right from the get-go. So from that perspective, do you think that the Canadian government should be bringing in measures, immigration measures, to attract and to retain immigrants in rural communities? And if so, what do you think we need to do with respect to our immigration measures?
That one I might actually let John take a stab at, because he has a little bit more background on that one than I do.
Sure, thank you very much. And there are a wide range of different programs under which people come to Canada under both temporary and permanent statuses. And as I mentioned, one of the factors that's really grown in Canada over time has been an increasing pathways between temporary status and permanent status, things that often did not exist in the past. And so I think that's an area that's continuing to develop. And over time, we're going to see a greater focus on all of the different mechanisms to support temporary residents of Canada to become permanent. We've heard about some of those in Thunder Bay today as well.
Canada used to have immigration streams that targets the full range of labor skill set, high, medium, and low. However, we've now really primarily focused on the high skill level, the economic level. Not to say that agricultural workers should be devalued, because our system, as it stands right now, devalues them. Do you think that we should bring back an immigration system that brings in the full range of workers from the labor force, the full range, high, medium, and low?
Yeah, I would say that the immigration system really does need to look at the full range of labor market needs across communities, and that the involvement of communities and whether it's businesses, economic development corporations, municipalities in smaller centers and helping to identify what those labor market needs is a very positive development in the system, and it's something that can continue in order to really try to look at labor market need very broadly and not only characterize it as something that is one specific type of person, say.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan, your time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Hallen. We will end this panel with Mr. Hallen and Mr. Reagan. Each one of you will have 2.5 minutes. So Mr. Hallen, you can please proceed. You will have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. So the labor shortages in healthcare and seniors care services are the highest of the sectors in Canada's economy. I know that in rural Alberta, especially many communities, there is a urgent need for physicians and nurses. So I'll open this up to any one of the witnesses, even more than one can answer to that. To what extent can immigration address these healthcare sector shortages in rural areas?
Who wants to jump on that one? I'll just speak at a high level, and I'm sure that will inspire those, especially in Thunder Bay, of some practical experience. But we talk about immigration, particularly if it's connected to, if it's driven by local community needs, like through the provincial initiatives or the new municipal program pilot. If we can connect people to local needs, give local residents in those communities a stake in the program, we can, there's a role for employers to actually support welcoming not only the employee, but also working with the families to feel supported. They're more likely to stay and stay within those communities and contribute to those communities. With regards to healthcare, having come from Kirkland Lake, my mother needs to drive to Sudbury to see a specialist. And so when we're actually talking about our work, we actually talk a lot about the fact that, immigration drives GDP. When there's more money that can be invested in those services. They can actually support the development of greater social and healthcare services in those communities. So it actually can be a boon to those communities. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, if I can add to it, we've seen a large percentage of our RNIP applicants are PSWs and registered nurses. Before, as you know, the committee knows that there was no stream for personal support workers in Ontario. So we've seen a great success in that program, and we've seen people move from other cities, particularly the Hamilton and Toronto areas, moving to Thunder Bay to work as nurses and personal support workers.
I don't know if there's any more time left, but I'd like to say something about doctors. Oh, I can't hear.
You can give a quick 10-second answer, please.
Okay, the immigration system is really, it works really weird for doctors because they're self-employed. So any of these job offer streams, like RNIP, for example, we have a doctor shortage, but we can't use the RNIP program for doctors because they're self-employed. They're not getting third-party salaries. They're billing through OHIP or whatever, so it doesn't work. And the clinics don't want to do labor market impact assessments and make the formal commitment for these doctors.
Sorry, if you can wind up, Ms. Lazon.
Yeah, they don't have an interest in doing that here.
Thank you, Ms. Lazon. We will now proceed to Mr. Sidhu. Mr. Sidhu, you will have 2.5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to Ms. Lazon's point, I know foreign credentials are recognized or are supposed to be recognized by the provinces. It's the provincial jurisdiction, and I get a lot of these requests at my office as well. So it's important to note that on the record here that the provinces need to continue working to approve foreign credentials. Ms. Lalonde, I believe I read somewhere on your website that states that in order to support higher levels of immigration, there needs to be more support for families with children. A national daycare system and quality education are two factors listed as imperative to executing this well. Our government's 2020 budget outlined our plan to bring down fees for regulated childcare down to $10 per day on average within the next 5 years to make childcare more affordable. This goes hand in hand with increasing Canada's economic activity by providing parents more affordable options, which will allow more parents to get involved in the workforce. Ms. Lalonde, can you speak to your thoughts on this plan and if you have any specific recommendations as we work with our provincial counterparts on our Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think childcare and the goal for a national childcare system has been one that it's not new. We've seen it before, and it hasn't actually materialized. And so, Century Initiative is prioritizing, advocating for a national childcare plan, working now towards action with coordination across all the provinces. And John, quickly, because I know we're just writing a paper on this, can you just pull out a couple of key points so that we have it documented, and then we can follow up with our paper post committee?
Well, sure. I would say that the proposal that has come forward from the current government is indeed very significant and will go a large measure towards achieving a vision for a national childcare system that's really been under discussion over the last 50 years in Canada. I think that the work going forward is really going to be about that kind of pan-Canadian work of coordinating with provinces and territories in order to set out the Canada-wide system that we all envision, and just not to lose sight of the ball, that this is now an issue that there will be differences of opinion, differences of views across parties, but really just to acknowledge that, like healthcare, childcare is something that we want to see as a core of our public services, and to see all parties have their own plans and their own ideas on how to move the ball forward. I would also just add that there are many benefits of a national childcare system, but one of the things that Century Initiative has identified is, as a continued issue, is the income gap between immigrants and non-immigrants in Canada, and that's particularly significant for women immigrants to Canada. And there's strong potential for the national childcare system to really support the kind of involvement in the labor market that will help to close that income gap.
Thank you, Mr. Meadow. Thanks. With this, our panel, a round of questioning comes to an end. And on behalf of all the members of this committee, I really want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today and providing your important input as we continue this study. So if there is something which you would like to bring it to committee's attention, and some issue which you want to highlight, which you were not able to discuss today, or if there is any further statistics or information you want to provide to the committee members, please feel free to send in some written submissions to the clerk of the committee, and that will be circulated to all the members. So thanks once again to everyone for being here today. And with this, this panel comes to an end and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.